Bye, Jen and Cody.
I was able to have that many questions anyway.
Good morning. Still morning. Huh? Of course you are. Oh, good, you found pencils. Yeah. All right.
Can you move a little bit that way, maybe, because that way people are not. There we go. She's moved. Oh, thank you. All right. Because that way it's at an angle.
Oh, at an angle. Gotcha. Perfect. Good morning. Pastor Peter, you have anything to say? We're 10 minutes running, like here.
Maybe say something about the sticky notes.
Yeah, so we passing around the sticky notes. If you guys could write down there's pencils up here if you don't have one. If you can write down your questions as we kind of go through, or responses. You can even write down responses. The other thing you can think about writing down, which I'd love to hear, is the stuff that we learned through the last 2 lessons. How have you been taking that out into the world and applying that in the world? Like, that would be great, because that's the point of this, right, is what we learn, we go out and we apply. And so in what ways are you finding that you're applying it, or what are you learning? Are you being more observant and noticing things that you didn't notice? That's always a good one, too, because sometimes we have new knowledge, we notice new things. Okay. So if you can write things down on a sticky note, we'll stop 15 minutes before the end, and we'll go through whatever questions and whatever comments or whatever's on those that we can go through. Okay?
And I'll go like this. I'll try to go like that when you go.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. All right, so that's the plan. We're going to try to cover a lot of things about, we left off halfway through last time. I only got through about half of what I planned on getting through on the first time. That's okay. We'll make things adjustments as we go along, and that's why the third session we kind of have things that I can actually drop. So if I need to make adjustments. Well, it's 12 to 12:30, but we'll probably go till 1 again. So, because we're starting about 15 minutes late, kind of.
Let's plan on that.
Yeah, and I'll always try to wrap it up as soon as I can. So, all right. I'm trying to find hang on, give me a second. Pastor Peter, what did I do with your stuff? Give me 1 second. 1 hour and 3 minutes starting now. Go! Okay, cool. Well, I want to talk out with kind of summarize what Pastor Peter has kind of said and go back over some of his stuff. And we talked about agency and targets the first time. We got into that, talking about agency and how we all have some level of agency. We all have some level of targetship. And that we all have some form of responsibility on that, right? We're all responsible in some capacity. I think that's the big takeaway that I want you guys to look at and think about in that. And then we talked about, like, there's skill sets for people with agencies, right? And there's skill sets that we have that we use, unspoken skill sets for people that are targets, like confusion, survival, right? Empowerment and going through. And then we have distancing and stuff. Remember all that? Okay, good. So that was first. Second thing Pastor Peter covered last week was God spoke into existence. And we're going to be talking a little bit about a little bit of these passages in Genesis 1:1 this week, kind of starting out. So spoke into existence. We talked about God's voice can destroy, and he has power to create, just like we can destroy and we can create, right, with our agency and targetship, right? So that's where we have power of voice, right? So we talked about if God needs to forgive your sins, there's nothing you do about it. It's not through works. He did it through grace, right? He did it through dying on the cross, right? And that the tongue has power, right? Fire, right? That's the creative source. And then we talked about the image of God, how we're created in the image of God, right? So that was great stuff, because we're going to talk today, we're going to get into, hopefully you guys have the handouts. Did everybody bring their handouts from, I got a few hands. If you didn't, I will pass out new ones. Here we go, Patty, can you, two, first, they're in order, 1 and 2, so each person should get 1 and then 2, and then 1 and 2, yeah. So we're going to go through this. We're going to talk about, we were talking about agency, and the thing that we were going to be talking about is the making of biblical womanhood. This is the book that we're kind of covering. Great book if you guys are interested. Look at all the sticky notes. We're talking about, we're going to start talking about one element of this, which is where we have agency, male versus targetship, female. Right? And then think about that as well, not just male and female. Let's look at intersex, right? And so other gender, right? We have other genders that are out there, right? And that's sometimes hard for us to wrap around our mind around. But one of the things I always say is go back to, when I was younger, we had people that were called hermaphrodites, right? Born with both genders, right? And we also know that we had people that were born with 2 different types of chromosomes, right? So we have that as well as in the mix stuff when we talk about male, female, and we have intersex, right? So that's something to think about as you kind of go through. So we're going to start talking about today about looking at just that area through this lens and giving voice. Remember, through counseling, I run into this a lot where in relationship to one another, we're not giving voice, right? And or we're stifling each other's voice. Oftentimes through couple counseling, it's about winning when we have an argument. When you're in a fight, it's usually, we know this from get-go, we want to win, and we're not willing to give up our position. And that's what power and control does. It's about winning. Second thing is I'm not being heard or seen. I'm repeating the same thing over and over. We're going back and having the same argument because I'm not being heard or seen. And I'm trying different ways to explain it, and we're not seeing each other. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about that and how our society plays into that and how the biblical translations have come over time and how that might play into that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So you're going to see at the top of the handout, and we're looking at 2 perspectives. So this is the first perspective of what we would call a patriarchal system, okay? So men lead, women follow. The Bible tells us so. So in Genesis 1:1, we have, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth, right? God created. And many of us go, God created man and woman, right? God created a divine order in which husbands rule over their wives, and this order is established at the beginning of creation. So this is what many of us are raised in the church believing, And again, this isn't about, I'm not here to change anybody's mind. This is just information. You get to do with it what you want. That's what this is about. Learning is about, is you gather information and you make your own decisions on what you do with it. So that's kind of what we have at the beginning, Genesis 1:1, right? So there's this belief that there's a divine order to things, right? And what that looks like. We learn that in Genesis 1:1, right, from the get-go of the Bible, right? And so one of the things is that we have the interpretation that this order creates a patriarchal system from the get-go. God created it. He ordained a patriarchal system where men have more power and control than women or intersex people, right? That goes back to what we're learning about, the agency and targetship. So in some religion circles, this can also be referred to complementarism, right? Where we complement one another, right? That we're helpmates, right? But why is, when we talk about helpmates, why is it always a woman that's a helpmate? God, preach it, sister. Right? Why is it always that? But this is helpmates. We are equally helpmates to one another, We equally come into a joint partnership. We equally sacrifice, we equally give to the relationship. It's both parties' responsibility, right? And so, remember we talked about winning? We talked about not being seen or heard, right? Who do you think when we talk about in a couple relationship, who do you think is not seen or heard? Is it an agent or a target? Both. Yeah. More often target. Yeah, but it could be both, right? Because it could be just difficulty understanding each other's perspectives inside. Most often it's the target, right? Who do you think is most often about winning, an agent or a target? An agent, right? Right. And we see this, again, this is one example, and we can apply this across all the isms that we're talking about. Disability, ableism, ageism, right? Okay, so you can kind of see that happening, right? So complementarism is the same as patriarchism. It's the same thing. There is no difference in that. So, and what do we mean by that? Is usually what this is taught as is, when we look at patriarch systems, it is male are ecclesiastic, boy, do I have to pronounce that word. Ecclesiastic, huh? Speak. Ecclesiastical. See, I can repeat it. Sometimes I have a hard time pronouncing words. Ecclesiastical in leadership, in the family, in the church, in every, right? That's the thing, right? In the workplace. Because what you have as structures in the home carry into structures in the world, which means our job, our school, we can start going down the list, our churches, right? We're mirror images of things, right? We repeat things as we go through. So even if you're the other thing, the second one, I'm going to skip what I was going to say. Second one is that there's a legal power of male household heads, right? The male makes the decision. The male speaks as the voice for the woman, right? And so they may come together and have a discussion. They may find a compromise. They may have something, and then it's agreed upon. Maybe they both go out and say it, but it's always, what we do is we always, as women, we refer back to the husband. Not in your house. Matt's like, nope. We're working on it. Yes, right? But that's common. I get this a lot from people. Well, I'll have to refer to my husband about that, right?
I hear stories about trying to get a loan.
Can you put your mic on?
That's all. You can repeat that.
Oh, you hear stories about trying to get a loan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About the bank not dealing with the woman saying, get your husband.
Yeah, we see that in all kinds of stuff in life, right? Usually it goes to the husband, right? I remember in the 70s, my mom, and I thought it was so strange, it stood out to me because she was a stay-at-home wife, of course, but she was Mrs. Robert Geist, right? And even on her credit card, bank card, it said Mrs. Robert Geist. And we went to the bank, it's Miss Robert's Geist accounts. You know, it was like interesting. I was always like, so where does mom fit in this picture? Because
There's one place where it's really different.
yeah,
Buying a house.
buying a house.
Woman always makes that decision.
The woman always makes it. Yeah, at the final end, right? The husband will compromise. What if the husband doesn't want it? I've seen where husbands
But I
don't
wonder
want
if that's a part of the complementarianism.
Right.
Is you're the one who's going to be here living in the house, working in the kitchen, so you need to like.
You need to, right, exactly. Yeah, right? So you can see this play out, yeah, again and again. And here's the thing is compromise is important. We have to be able to compromise in order to work together, right? We're not saying it's not good. And some of us do need to surrender our position, right? But if we're always constantly, and this is what's happening with agency and targetship, if we're constantly surrendering our position for our husbands, for a patriarchal system, where's your voice? you've lost your voice. Susan. Oh, no, sorry. We tried to leave comments and
No, we're setting a bad example.
I know. Yeah, we're trying to, yeah, I don't want to get going down that road. I have Pastor Peter responding because we're teaching together.
I have a
but-
question, so I'm going to write it down.
Okay, but if you can write down your questions or responses, that'd be great. We're going to hit them the last 15 minutes because, like I said, I'm going to cover a lot. So if we can write them down kind of, that would be great. But I'd love to hear your response and what you're going to say. So do you have a sticky pad up there and a pencil? Okay, perfect. Okay. So, so that's the thing, right? So we're looking at all these things. So I just want you guys to be evaluating this and kind of thinking about it in what we're talking about here, right? The third thing you see is a society that promotes male authority and female submission. That's what we're going to get into, right? And we do this in Wales. I hardly ever, I mean, this is something I learned as a counselor, is women, we apologize for interrupting people. Before we walk in sometimes to ask our boss a question, to know how to do, maybe there's something we got to know, some information. Not that we need to know how to do our job, we just need the information to do our job. And we say, I'm sorry for interrupting. We use the word, I'm sorry. And if you listen, what we know in psychology, Brené Brown, you guys might be familiar with Brené Brown. She is a quantitative psychologist, right? So she listens to people's stories, quantitative. She assigns a number to those stories, to the lettering, to the numbers, and she does some calculation or whatever, and she comes up with like consistencies. I don't know exactly how it works. It's not my area of expertise. But what happens is, what we know is that when we look at the amount of times women say I'm sorry, it far surpasses men. We excuse ourselves constantly for being in the room through subtle things, subtle, minute changes in our behaviors and stuff that are really so minute. They're not, we call them micro behaviors, right? That we just do it, right? And our husbands aren't always aware. Our partners aren't always aware, right? So really that's what happens is, in this idea of there's a divine order, we're really saying that these three things are coming up, that women, it really is going to promote male authority and female submission, not just in the church, in society, in all aspects of what we work in, right? The next thing is what happens, and so when we have these three things in play, we have limiting of women's authority goes hand in hand with limiting of women's economic power, because we said this carries over. So we talk about economic power, right? Ability to get an equal pay job, and we go, well, we're more equal pay. We're still not. I could tell you a story. I'm not going to, at a job I worked where we found out that the men were getting hired, and there was almost a lawsuit. They could have easily had a lawsuit because the men were getting hired in with less experience and more pay. And that was only 4 years ago. Yeah. Right? Empowerment. We're going into that targetship empowerment where our voice, right? So, yeah, and that wasn't that long ago, right? And then within 2 years, they recycled back to it, and we had to recorrect it again within the agency. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, yeah. So, teaching men and that women rank lower than men do. That's what we're teaching, right? We start this teaching at a very young age, right? In our industrial system, that's what we call it. Your school age, when you're going to school, we call it the industrial development stage. And the reason why it's called the industrial development stage is because what are you learning? You're learning to be a productive worker through working in school. You're learning how to get along with your peers. You're learning how to turn in homework on time. You're learning to do work and get a grade, do work and get a paycheck, right? That's what we're learning. School is much more than just 1 + 1 = 2, right? So we call it the industrial development because it's where we begin to train kids and teach kids how to become responsible adults and be a part of society, right? So we learn this in counseling psychology. I learned this in my master's degree when we go, right? So we get into the industrial stuff. We teach women that their voice is worth less than men. We place power in the hands of men and take power away from women. So, so that's kind of the things that can come out of this. You could probably maybe think about many other times where, or other things that this type of a system or structure can kind of create a silencing of voice, right? And so, write some down on your notes, like writing it down on a piece of paper, you know, like, because those are out there. I'm sure you guys have experienced it in your own life, you know. In 2018, Russell Moore explains wifely submission as cultivating a voluntary attitude of recognition toward godly leadership. So, and he was, you know, these people I'm quoting or that are on your list are people that have been historically referenced in other books or other religious documentation or whatever else. So this is a guy, you'd find out more about him if you read where he's from. I'm not going to look it up. I encourage you to get the book. So Russell Moore explains, like, this is what it is. It's a voluntary attitude of recognition toward godly leadership. So as women, what he's defining as is that you're volunteering yourself as a godly recognition of your men as godly leadership. So you're volunteering to do it. Does it feel very voluntary? I got a few heads. No. I mean, how many of us have had our voice silenced and we felt like we didn't have a choice in it? You know, it's happened. You know, again, you know, when you're in targetship, this happens. So, but we that's what we do, is we give that up. You want to know why you don't have some people in your churches? They're not willing to submit to you guys as godly leadership. They're rebelling. And shouldn't they be? I mean, this is a huge thing. This isn't in this church. This is in a variety of churches out there. I don't want anything to do with that, God. Are you kidding me? Who would? So all these things that we're taught about being Christians and showing up Christ-like, and that all these things about being servants and all these things about edifying God and lifting up, how do you think we're doing with this? Across the board. I don't care what denomination you go to.
Yeah, the church isn't full.
Church isn't full, is it, anywhere? They're all down in membership. Every one of them. And then we go, well, I don't know what the problem is. I've had ministers tell me, like, I don't know what the problem is. I don't know. What is up with these young people today? They just don't want to come to church. Well, they don't have the wool over their eyes. You know, they're seeing this and going, wait a second, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with this anymore. They're making a different choice. So teaching teaches the voice is worthless, less than men. Okay, Christianity Patriarch. This is a quote by the author of this book here, Beth Barr. Christian patriarchy does not remain confined within the walls of our homes. It does not stay behind the pulpits. It cannot be peeled off suit coats like name tags as men move from denying women's leadership at church to accepting the authority of women at work or women in the classroom, right? So she's saying what I'm saying is, like, you can't have it here and then carry out into society in the same way. You can't have it in your house and carry it out in society and expect differences there. Right. So, mirror image, right? We understand the Bible presents a beautiful portrait of complementary between sexes and both men and women created in the image of God. right? Both men and women created in the image of God. We talked about image of God last week. God, genderless, neither male nor female, but yet why do we have a patriarchal system then? And a loss of voice. If we're created in the image of God, he's neither male nor female, doesn't that make us all equal? You know? Just as we look as everyone as a reflection of God. So we're all a reflection of God. So I kind of have down there some image of God, neither male nor female. Pastor Peter talked about that last week.
Just writing that verse
Yeah,
down.
yeah. Talked about that, right? And that's why I kind of wanted to go back and summarize a little bit of what he talked about last week, right? I love here, I kind of wrote this down because a lot of times this is what I see in church. We talk about Trinity, you know, God the Father, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus Christ, right? And oftentimes when I see this image, it's a triangle. And you'll see that on your handouts, a triangle, right? But how some people interpret that when they see that, see, a lot of people this was an interpretation all in one, right? But God's at the point. And some people go, oh, so he's the headship, and everybody else falls below, right? And so there's then, again, this explanation of a divine order, right? That goes back to Genesis 1:1 of creation, right? When we look at it through that lens. And so, but what if it's really, if we could rechange that, because that was really created by somebody and it's kind of stuck. That's not, the triangle's not biblical. That was just an image created, and it's stuck. What if we did equal signs in between? We could put God last, we could put him in the middle, right? It delineates one above the other, right? They're all equal, right? And I have a tendency, this is my own thing, you talk about all these different beliefs of image of God.
Right.
Yeah. And, you know, I have because I come from a counseling background, I think of God as our minds, wisdom, Christ as our body, and the Holy Spirit as our spirit. We're created in the image of God, mind, body, spirit, right? That's me. That's kind of how I look at it. But you named off so many different ways that people have interpreted that, right? We don't really have a sound way of looking at that. Like everybody agrees and comes to the table and goes, yep, that's it.
Right, exactly.
Right? Yeah. So we have the image of God, right? I love this. I came across this a while back. It was somebody was telling me about prisms. You know how sparkling and shiny they are? And I thought about this and I started thinking about the image of God and the light that we shine out into the world. And the really cool thing about a prism is if we were all created mind, body, and spirit, and if you take a triangle, right, mind, body, spirit, and a prism is made up of all these different triangles, some are flipped upside down, some right, you know what it does? It reflects even brighter than one. If we're all created mind, body, and spirit, and we come together and reflect as a church the image of God, just think the amazing reflection we're going to have in the world. Right? That's what draws people in, is they see Christ in us, right? So that's what I get kind of wrapped up in sometimes in those things, is this reflection, right? Refraction, changing in the direction of light. A rainbow, right, is a changing refraction. It's a changing of the direction of light. Anyway, so yeah, it makes me think of that. But anyway, all right, we're moving along. Good. If we get done early, we'll have more time for remarks and questions. Okay.
Questions, or are you just going to go straight through the main
I'm going to go straight through. Yeah. And then we're going to give whatever time's left at the end. Because that was feedback I got last week from a lot of people. Like, just they wanted to hear what was being said, and it was, yeah. Patriarch. So we're on page 2. Patriarch existed from the beginning of history. Gilgamesh. In 1839, English scholar Austin Henry Layard, 2 mounds located in the heart of ancient Assyria, modern-day Iraq, and found clay fragments that told the story of King Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it. I'm
Gilgamesh,
so
yeah.
bad. I'm good at slaughtering. You're going to find that.
You know,
I'm
Gilgamesh, you got it.
dyslexic a little bit, so I'm good at slaughtering words. So, Gilgamesh, right? So, in the first dynasty of, you got it there, I'm not going to say it, and around 2750 BC, similar seen in ancient India was the Ramana, right? So, their text, historical documents, and different things. And what we learned from Gilgamesh is even at that time, what we saw was that patriarch looks right because it's been practiced around the world, historically supported. It's really our first documents that we have where we've seen a patriarchal type system, right? Where it really supports this idea that God created, you know, but we really we haven't seen anything historically before that. Now, does it mean it doesn't exist? I don't know, or whatever, right? But that's the first documentation we have of a patriarch system in society and where it comes from. In Mesopotamium, women were property. They lacked education and were legally disempowered, legally sponsored, and rarely could speak for, I wrote this, for themselves. And were oftentimes the physical violence. Were prone towards physical violence by their spouses, right? So we see that we go back in history, that's that Gilgamesh, and we go back to Mesopotamia, and we go back and we look, and we see that women were property, right? And so we see this historically throughout, right? This is what we see. So why would we not think differently today? Why do we think the same thing today? We would, right? Who wouldn't? This is historical documents validated. You feminist. Right? It's like we see it throughout history. Of course it makes sense God created it from the beginning of time. And therefore, as Christians, why aren't we following what God created, right? This is the way it's meant to be. Okay. But shouldn't, as Christians who are called to be different from the world, treat women different? So that's that big question. As Christians, aren't we called to be something outside of the world? If we can see patriarchism throughout history as part of the world, we can see it as a worldly structure that came into play, right? If it came from creation, then okay, maybe we're following God's will. But if it didn't, then what? Right? And then how are we going to change voice? Maybe we need to just not stop trying to have voice. We need to give up and just surrender. No. No, I'm not going to do it. Okay. All right. So that's one mindset that has kind of come out of historical stuff, right? And this is often, for me, when I'm in because we live culturally Christian, right? Most people come into our world Christian, even if they are no longer believe in God or they've walked away from faith. Oftentimes they might have been raised in the faith or something like that. Our churches support this, right? Our society supports it. Our households support it. So, of course, even people that come into my environment as a counselor, oftentimes they're operating under the same structure, right? This is a common structure. Yeah. So, Dwayne agrees with me. He said yes. Okay, so, so we're going to talk about the second belief that's out there that some people believe that we don't talk about a lot in the churches. And I don't know, I mean, this is the first time I really seen it in this book, and it kind of drew me in because I was like,
Can you hold the book up again?
oh, The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr, and she's a historical professor at Baylor University, and she's also studied theology. This is her specialty. This is really her book. I mean, she goes over it all. This is what she does at Baylor University. So, okay. So the second belief that we kind of have that we don't hear too much about, and this is more from, we threw in a little bit of historian stuff. We're going to talk a little bit more. And the second belief is that patriarchy is not divinely ordered in creation as an order. It came out of the fall. It came out of the fall. It's not divinely ordered in creation. It came through the fall of Adam and Eve. That's the second belief out there, that this came out of that belief. So if we instead assume, or like this is an assumption, and go, okay, what if it wasn't out of creation? What if this instead was a product of Adam and Eve? What if this, at the time of creation, wasn't God's ideal plan? Remember, God created helpmates, equal. Right? So, then fall, right? So, what if it came out of the fall? So, in Genesis 3:16, in pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desire will be for your husband. Right? So, I love that it does this. So, it's in pain you shall bring forth children, comma. That's a complete sentence. It's kind of ending. It's going and, right? And, commas being and yet your desire shall be after your husband. So there's a belief, up until the fall, our desire was after God. And in the fall, our desire shifted away from God, and our desire became after our husband. It shifted, which means that's a possibility of a patriarchal system, of the birth of patriarchy. Huh, I knew I'd get there. Right? So that idea that it came from the fall, right? And he shall rule over you. That's what it goes on to say. And he shall rule over you. So if this is part of sin and comes out of the fall, again, as Christians, then doesn't that make that patriarchy worldly? And as Christians, aren't we called to be outside of the world? We're called to give voice to one another. We're called to recognize each other and be in relationship with one another. Yeah. So, let me move on. So some people believe that was really the birth of patriarchy. Adam becomes the source of his curse, the ground, working the ground, labor. Adam runs after labor, right? He's working, right? And women desires to go after their husbands, right? So, and we can see that, right? Adam becomes the source of Eve, right? So this whole shift created. And God did this oftentimes, like, what did you say, Pastor Peter, last week? The Beatitudes, a reordering of value. Wow. Doesn't that fit? Now you take that and you kind of go into a biblical context, and you go, wow, that kind of actually fits more, right? So this reordering of things. Things weren't ordered right, now we're going to reorder them, right? And not that they weren't ordered right, excuse me, because I got to back that up, because I missaid what I was going to say. But he reordered things, right? Sin came in and it reordered things. Christ dying on the cross is to set and reorder things to the way it should be. Christ dying for our sins, Christ coming, right? There's a shift in reordering and a reshift back, right? So, and this was the curse. Remember, this was the curse we were giving. God wasn't going, oh, you're a good child. Here's Now you get a pine after your husband, right? Or after men, right? No. It was a curse. God, right? Pain and child labor. It wasn't considered to be like, oh, great, we get pain. Right? Oh, men are like, I got to go to work every day and sweat to my brow, you know. You pull these big stumps. I get a sore body. I'm going to suffer more physically, you know. No. These weren't expectations of things are going to be great, right? It was a shift and stuff. So before that, there's this belief that Adam and Eve, as equal partners, put God first. They both looked to God. And we see this kind of in the wedding vows. We see that historically that shifted over time. It's in the book. I might have it on my next section, so I'm just kind of jumping ahead. But the wedding ring, now when you get married and you go up there, and it's to remind us of our husband, like our heart closest to our heart and to our husband. And actually that was written back originally by, I can't remember who it was. And it was Archbishop or something like that was marrying people. And he was saying that was to remind us to look to God. And we've changed the whole symbolism now in our wedding ceremonies. So that's created kind of a shift. But we'll talk, I think I have it coming up. We'll talk more about it next 2 weeks from now. So theologically speaking, this is not new information. This information has been out there for a long time from a theological standpoint. How many have heard this theological thought or explanation before? I see a lot of heads shaking no. Never heard it, right? But in the historian, in your universities, in the people that study and go back and look at documents, your archaeologists, this is not new information. This is old. Why aren't we learning this? Yeah. Yeah, right. Because it doesn't support the system of an ordered hierarchy, right? And we can talk about how some of that came into play. You'll see it in some of the translations, and I think it was King James who asked for the Bible to be rewritten because it put him on equal footing with his subservients, his people that were working the fields, and so he wanted it rewritten so he could be of higher order, right? So it was...
Let's ask the first husband.
Huh?
Let's ask the first husband.
The first, yeah. So we know that before then, the Bible looked at it a little bit differently. Again, we'll hopefully look at it. Again, this is all in this book. Read it. It's a really good book. I found it very interesting. Theologically speaking, theologically speaking, this is not new information. In 2010 essay by Stanley Gundry, former president of the Evangelical Theological Society, he states this in something that he wrote. Patriarchy is created by people, not ordained by God. He was high up in the evangelical church. 2010, he wrote this. That's why, again, are we being taught something different or not being taught this information, right? I don't know. Before the fall, both Adam and Eve submitted to God's authority. After the fall, because of sin, women would now turn first towards their husband and then to God. Patriarchy defines the boundaries of women's lives. It also defines subjugated peoples and races as the others to be dominated. So this problem with patriarchy is it doesn't just define men and women. That's what I'm saying. That's why we went all those isms and all the agency and targetship to begin, because it defines all of that stuff. Right? Principle here gets applied across the board. There's a differentiation. There's order, right? Value placement on things. And that was written by Clarence J. Martin on there. So patriarch walks with structural racism and systematic oppression, and it has done so consistently throughout history. That's what we see. Women became increasingly dependent on men as agricultural communities began to be the heartbeat of human civilization. Even Eve was told she would be under her husband. Simultaneously, Adam was told he would be under agricultural labor. Now, so what is she talking about here? So in the industrial era, right, when we began to shift historically from our more agricultural-based, economic-based, we do have differences, men and women, right? Men are physically, right? A lot of them are, right? Some women are strong, right? But there are some stuff, right? But they went out and they're the ones that became the labor, the ones that began to do the labor, right? And that even grew even more during the industrial era, right? The agricultural era. It changed even more in our communities. So in that support in history, we see that kind of supporting, right? So in counseling, here's what I'll tell you. We have something that's called core beliefs, right? So all of us learn core beliefs between usually the age of 0 and 6. They're things that are told to us directly or indirectly through what we see in our world and in our environment, interactions between our family, our siblings. They're unconscious things that we learn about the world, other people, or ourselves. The world is a scary place. The world is unsafe. Right? That might be something we learn. Other people can't be trusted. Right? That might be something we learn. Other people are amazing people. Like that's a positive core belief we might learn. Right? We learn both positive and negative core beliefs about ourselves. I'm not good enough. God can't use me. See the right people and character in the Bibles, right? All the characters, like I'm not good enough. They had a lot of core beliefs, negative core beliefs about themselves. They stutter, right? We have this about ourselves. I'm unlovable. I'm worthless. Right? We have all these negative core beliefs that kind of come up. And so when we have an environment where we have shifts like this happen, throughout life after 0 to 6, we have experiences that happen that bring value to that belief, if it's a negative belief, of our value, our worth, the world is, the others are, right? Our negative core beliefs. And so it's the same thing with this. When we have a system that's kind of, like we have what God kind of created, right? And then we have a shift, then it compounds what we already have there, right? And then historically, we have things happen, right? With the Roman War, we'll talk about the Roman War a little bit next time, right? We have that happen, and that supports kind of that belief, right? We have Gilgamesh, we have Mesopotamia, we have, right? And layers, and here we are today as a society. All these layers happen, right? But we never look at that. We never go back and we don't go, what can we learn from the historical texts, from history and different things, right? And question that. We go, well, this is the way it's always been. This is the way it'll always be. So, okay. So, power and economy are maintained literally by human labor. So our economic base is maintained by how we work, right? When the financial stuff shifted, in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, all of a sudden women, right? World War II, there's a good example. World War II is probably the best. All the men went off to war, right? And what happened? Rosie the Riveter, right? Stepped in, right? And advertising was there to promote that, right? Encourage women to get into the workplace, right? And we saw the messaging that was being socially that we would hear through news and different things, that shifted.
What was the baseball movie? There's no crying in baseball. That was
League of Their Own.
Same thing.
Right, the baseball, right? Women came in and played baseball because if you're not, it encouraged them to come out and sign up because we needed things to motivate the men overseas, right? So we put women in short skirts playing baseball, right? So baseball's something men like, and short skirts, right? And right? So the messaging changed, right? So you see these shifts historically about power and the United States economy and how messaging changes that supports this type of shifting going on, right? Okay. So patriarchy exists in the Bible because it was written in a patriarchal world. What is surprising, though, is how many Bible verses undermine rather than support patriarchy.
That's right.
There's a lot of verses. Maybe you can talk about that. I don't know what you're talking about next week. Maybe he's talking about that. That's not mine. I'm not doing that. But
I'm not.
you can research it.
Yeah.
But how many does not, right? And how many things do we have of women in the Bible that don't support the patriarchy? I mean, Deborah,
Bingo.
she's a judge. The men would come to her for advice on war,
Right.
right? Phoebe, she was a deacon, right, under Paul. She delivered the Roman books. It's at the very end, usually at the very end of Romans, when it talks about her. It's not very long, it's like a paragraph or two, right? And we got many other people in the Bible. I left that last because I figured if we get to it, we get to it. If not, you guys can, if we don't have time. But yeah, so there's a lot of things where it doesn't really support patriarchy. It doesn't really fit within the Bible when we really look at it. Now, it can fit in the Bible when we take these verses and we, what would be the word I would say to support this idea, right? Yeah, use, manipulate, I don't know. I don't want to use strong language, but
I know you want to take notes.
yeah, but you got to say it.
If the women here will go home, open your Bible, and pick out some text that refers to sons and fathers and so forth, and flip the words to women, daughters, and so forth. I had a visceral shock
Yeah.
the first time I did it. I was surprised that I had a physical shock when I started putting myself into the Bible, saying female, woman, daughter.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah. More things really supported that,
makes
right?
all of this real.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it does. It really overthrows that. And when you really look at that, then you go, well, wait a second, then maybe this really did come out of the fall,
Sections
right?
read just
Right.
incredibly different.
Right. So, and you see this throughout, like, again, go back to agent and target ship, right? So we're not just talking about men and women. We're using this as an example right now. It happened to be the book I have. I'd love to do some on, ableism and disabled, because I don't think that's a topic we talk about enough. But we can see this throughout the isms, right? And I bet you we could go back historically and see things as different. I mean, I'll give you a great example. I love it because Peter, I always get this wrong. It's Peter who's chasing after the chariot, right, to get a ride. Hell, in a taxi, Uber. Isn't this Peter?
Keep going.
I'm trying to remember.
Oh,
And then there's a guy who's
That's
a eunuch.
Philip, yeah.
Philip. See, I always get it wrong. I want to Peter, Paul. I don't know. This is where I'm not great at those things. I know the stories, but I just don't. That's why Pastor Peter, I need him. Philip, chasing after it, right? And there's a eunuch in there. Anybody know much historically information about who eunuch individuals were? Huh? Castrated. They're a trans community. They're a trans community. The Bible's the greatest psychology book out there. God knew us. That's our trans community. And you know what? What did Philip do? He baptized him. He read him the Bible, witnessed to him, and baptized him, and walked away. Philip never said, you need to change. You need to become something different. He never did that. Never said anything to him. Just like me, right? He could have killed me, or he could have changed me. He didn't do either one of those, right? He's an amazing God. He's a diverse God. So, patriarch might be a part of Christian history. This is what we want to know, is that It might be a part of Christian history, but that doesn't make it Christian, right? And we need to begin to say, okay, so maybe we need to look at these things differently. Am I taking a step back from a place where I need to step forward and have a voice? Am I allowing the messages I've been told and taught for keeping me from doing what God has given me as my own gifts to use? Women have surrendered their gifts in a household and what God has called them to for the betterment of husband and family. You didn't see Deborah doing that, right? So, God gives us gifts. One of the best things I know, there's a counselor, psychologist out there, and she's a couples counselor. She talks about sex and all kinds of stuff. But she says one of the best things that you can do as a couple is when you can see either one on stage like a rock star. It makes you fall in love all over again. If you see your wife shining bright, doing the thing that God has called her to do, you're going to fall even more in love with her. This is when God is talking about when he says, give yourself as Christ. Because he knew our human nature. When we give and we allow the freedom and stand by our partner to grow and shine and to be the best person they can be, we put that out in the world. And God's seen and heard. It's important. Okay. Yay. Guess what? I finished the first section from last time I met. We didn't get to go through. I'm going to move on to the next one real quick. I'm only going to cover 2 things on this. I'm not going to cover everything else because it does have to do with it. Oh, God, no. Don't tell me it didn't. Okay. Pull your phones out. Because I don't have the handout, so I'm going to have you go to the handout. If you got your phone, you know how to use technology, you can use my phone. It's two. We're going to do a Google search if you want to on this. And so what we're going to look up is we're going to go under Google. We're going to do power and control, will.
Wheel?
Yeah. And you're going to see it pop up. This is the one that we're looking for. There's different powers and control wills out there, but they're all basically the same. I prefer this one because this one is 13 form, and so it's talking about domestic violence, but I really think power and control is beyond that, right? Domestic violence is a product of power and control, but power and control is bigger than that, right? So this one here is power and control, 13 forms of domestic violence. You can go under images. So if you search your images, I can pass this around when I'm done. I'll bring the handouts next week. I forgot to print them. It's by, okay. Security alert. Yeah, so hopefully you'll see it in there. If not, I'll get you some next week, like I said, if you guys apologize for that. So, so the power control wheel. So the middle of the circle is power. So this is the things that we would see in power play, power positioning, power stuff, right? So I don't know if it's big enough to see on those. So somebody that is working or using power in a situation, so agency, working against a target ship, we will see oftentimes creates chaos and conflict by turning people against each other, misrepresenting situations. Right? Because if I can misrepresent it and I'm the one that knows the truth, Who's going to have the power in the room? Me. Right? So that's one thing that we look for is like, are they creating chaos? Yeah. Want to create the chaos, right? So then it creates confusion. Remember on that target ship thing, we had different skill sets. And the second one was confusion, right? So as a target, your second place is going to be confusion. Does not creating chaos create confusion? Yes, 100%. So that's a power play. Second thing you see on here is twist past events to gain control. Again, a power play, right? Because that creates confusion. I don't, you weren't hearing that, right? That's not what happened, right? Or no, that's not what happened that day, right? A credit hog acts like they get everything done, doesn't give healthy credit where it's due, right? So people, and we can do this for a variety of things. Sometimes people just, low self-value, low self-worth, might take somebody else's credit. You see this sometimes in the workplace, right? Take credits for projects or different things. But what happens is it's disempowering the person who really did the work, right? And it makes us look like we're in a better place, right? We see this within relationships happen, right? So, and that's the thing that we do. I'll have to talk to my husband, right? We put it back to the power, right? So giving credit where maybe it was I actually came up and I was help, and he agreed with me, but I will still say, I have to double check with my husband or whatever on that stuff. It's always good to double check your calendar, though, if you got stuff going on. It's not what I'm saying here, so yes. The next one you'll see is diffusions of grandeur believes they are smarter, wiser, stronger, richer, more powerful than they are. So oftentimes we'll see people, well, I know so-and-so. People that throw names, I know so-and-so, I know so-and-so, that type of thing, right? It's a way of showing me as some level of importance, right? That's a power play, right? Refuses to get counseling, refuses to allow spouse to get counseling. So I'm going to refuse to get counseling, or I'm going to refuse my spouse. Or I'll only do counseling if we do couple counseling. Power control, domestic violence stuff, as counselors, we don't do couple counseling when there's domestic violence happening. Because whatever's said in counseling gets used against you. And can be a volatile situation, right? So restricting somebody's movement is a power control play. That's really what this is talking about. Counseling is not the only place. Refusing you to have friends, but yet they get to go hang out with their friends. Transportation, right? We could go through the list, right? Refusing, how does this play out in other isms in the church? Refusing you to have a role in the church because of X, Y, Z, right? And I don't, there's things do have to shift sometimes in some ways. That's the reality of it. We do have laws on the books and different things like that for protection, right? So we're not talking about those, right? We're talking about other ways where, like me, I've been a bench warmer for a long time, sitting in the pew. Strong faith, but couldn't use anything God was giving me, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's a power play, right? Projecting addictions as spouse's fault without taking responsibility. It's your fault. It's your fault I had that beer. It's your fault I snorted that, injected that. It's your fault. It's your fault I went to the gambling, It's your fault, if you wouldn't stress me out, right? Yeah. We're not responsible for other people's behaviors. Racist, elitist, this is such small print, I have a hard time reading it too. Diminishes, ridicules culture, color, gender, age, status, believes own identity is superior, right? So that can be a power play, right? Because it feeds into agency. We've talked about that, right? Feeds the agency. Obsessed with being respected may get aggressive to parents, children, elderly if acting with disrespect. So, you know, this is always, when I worked in juvenile corrections, disrespect was always an interesting thing because you had the gangs and it was all about respect, right? It's about respect, right? And so it was always interesting is they would come over and bully you to get, and you would need to respect me, right? So there's fear involved. I'll get beat up if I'm not respecting you, right? If you speak out contrary to, then you're going to be in trouble, right? So that's the idea of respect when you look at those type of things, right? And we see this sometimes in some religious stuff that kind of happens, right? Respect, this idea of respect and speaking out against the church or different things. God was the best one at doing that, Christ was, right? So respect, right? But respect isn't something that you're given. It's something you earn by respecting others, by being polite, by being nice. People, you earn it, right? So that was something we always had to work on retraining. Entitled to act as if they're better than you. Others give way to their preferences. Others should take care of their needs, right? So their needs to be taken. Now, does that not fit into patriarchy that we're just now talking about? Yeah. Right? A lot of these do, right? Supports that system along with other isms. The other one I'm going to talk about is spirituality. Soul-destroying behaviors. So oftentimes we talk about behaviors that are used like to destroy our soul. So what would that look like? That would be like putting us down, devaluing what we have to say, you know, from a spiritual base, you know. Using scripture to excuse abusive behavior, right? Twisting scripture to gain power. So putting beliefs down, isolating from faith community, using church to gain advantage, refusing to get counsel, or only go see Christian counseling. I've seen that. That's a great one. I'll only see, because if I have a belief, time. Okay. If I have a belief, then I'm only going to go see somebody that supports that belief, which is then just going to support everything I'm doing at home, which then, why did you even go get counseling? Right? It's kind of a waste of time and energy. So silencing you with the Bible, right? So these are like what we use in power play stuff with the scripture and the word and how that comes into play. Okay. Got through that. That's where I wanted to end today. 4 minutes shy.
Create a system with the Post-it.
Yeah, so Patty's collecting Post-it notes right now.
Make sure that we
Yeah, and so I'm going to,
ourselves time, yeah.
yeah, we're not going to get probably through all the Post-it notes, but we're just going to reach in and grab.
Good.
And hopefully they relate to what you guys might have or thoughts or different things you guys have wrote down. We got everybody's Post-it, anybody not get their Post-it notes?
Do those first, and then you can get them.
Okay, you can cover yours next week. Gosh, that's a list. Yeah. Yeah.
Include that next week. That's your next sermon.
Yeah, so this one says changing the text of the Bible from men's son, etc., to woman daughter. Shocking the first time. You mentioned that. You did that, right? Yeah, because if we're created in the image of God, then as we read through these verses that apply are going to, right? They're not just speaking to men, they're speaking to women.
I don't know how the men would feel. That would be very interesting.
Right.
But
There's a lot of controversy around that. That was when the RSV was
It's been
written.
a deliberate choice by the Lutheran Church in our Pew Bible. It will say
Yeah.
sons and daughters,
Uh-huh.
brothers and sisters. And
Yeah.
where in the Greek it just says brothers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, in our Pew Bible, it intentionally says brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And that was a very deliberate move that the church has been making since.
In the 80s, there was a big controversy around it because they were going to try to do more gender neutral through as we go through like that. And what happened was there's a lot of ministers in the evangelical side that ended up creating a committee and having upset about it and stuff. And so they came out and redid the NSV to an RSV. If you guys know the
Well,
RSV.
you saw it this
But,
morning.
yeah.
The text said, and come follow me and I will make you fishers for people.
For people.
That's an example.
Yeah.
It's a big improvement, but like I say, some of those texts, when you read it, the dynamic of it shifts quite a bit, and it was a real
Right,
surprise.
so let's
And
make
I
it,
picked up a woman's
so you're
Bible,
saying
and
let's
it
make
doesn't do that.
come
you know?
follow me, I
Yeah.
will make you fishers of women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you
It
get
sounds wrong, doesn't it?
specific,
Yeah.
Okay, here's the next one.
Wonder what they're fishing for.
Youth feel suppressed, they are more open-minded, and they feel the church isn't. I love this. That's exactly, we were talking about that, like, right? Why isn't the church growing? What's going on with the church? And it's like, because it's not just me, it's youth. Kids have thoughts and ideas. They have more information before that ever at the tip of their fingers through electronics and stuff. They have thoughts and ideas, but we're stuck in this idea before, and kids want to come, they have value, they have knowledge they want to share, and be a part of their ministry that God's placed on them,
And I wonder if this is why you have pushback against diversity, inclusion training in schools, because our kids are too open-minded. We need to take away the diversity training
Yeah.
that we have in the public schools, so our kids stop being open-minded.
Yeah,
Of course.
yeah.
We want to control how the kids
Yeah.
are too open-minded.
Well, it's scary, right? When we're scared because we're afraid that it's going to open up doors that our kids might be influenced or open up to things. But you know what? The thing is, most people didn't, when you were little, you didn't learn about sex usually from your parent. You learned about it from your friends. So the idea that what the schools are doing with inclusion and diversity and all that, that's already out there before they even started doing it, because they were learning about it all from their friends, right? They created more of a structure to it, yeah.
And throw in a bucket of hormones and you throw it
Yeah, yeah. After World War II, but now go back to the kitchen.
So after World War II, what I was going to say is that
Yeah.
after World War II,
Yeah.
they said, you guys got to come out and work. Well, now the men are back. You need to give them
Well,
their job back.
And again, we saw that all those ads that were promoting us to go into the workplace were promoting us to go back into the home, right? Yeah, I say us, I wasn't even around during there, but it's me too, yeah.
The employers have to pay a man's wage.
Right.
When they had women at
Gwen?
at least three-quarters
Well,
less than.
if you look at Proverbs 30,
Uh-huh,
you will find a huge list of, it's for the capable wife,
Right.
but the capable woman, and she's doing everything a man can do.
mm-hmm. Yeah, Patty talks about that one a lot, yeah.
Who's left out? Oh,
Yeah,
my gosh.
yeah, yep. That's another one of those things where it doesn't really fit the patriarch system we talk about, right? That Proverbs, right? Fear of change, we talked about that. Fear of being ostracized. Yeah, as victims, we stay silent because we're afraid of standing out and speaking up and creating change until all of a sudden there's more people on board. And then when more people get on board, then we're like willing to go to a protest or step into something, right? Fear of existing power structure. Absolutely, 100%. We've seen that historically, like what happens with that, Yeah. We saw that in World War II also with the gay transgender community because they were actually more open. There was marriages going on in Germany during that time. And then they all ended up in research concentration camps and stuff. More so the men than women, but yeah. And doing experiments to figure out why they are gay, right? And so a whole group of people that were part of the Holocaust that we don't always talk about that were in concentration camps, yeah. Ideal of widow to be, I think this is yours. What does that say?
This is mine. Mine is the minute that you sit down, like we were talking about sales
Right.
offices and like
Mhm.
repair shops, any place. Once you are a widow,
Yeah.
and once they identify you as a widow,
Mm-hmm.
you become someone to be exploited.
Mm-hmm.
Victim.
Yes.
Because you don't have a man to protect you.
You don't have a man to protect you.
That's right.
Right.
Luckily, my husband, when we had an arrangement when it was a female kind of thing, like going to school to talk about our daughter, he went.
Yeah.
And the conversation got a whole lot different he would send me into auto stores and give me the part that was needed and so forth.
Right.
And we just played with this all through our marriage.
Yeah.
That we would roll switch because we got people's attention, we got a better story,
Right.
we got better service,
Right.
we got answers
Yeah.
when we would have not gotten answers.
It's great if you learn how to maneuver it, you learn how to work the
But
system,
they
right?
were-
Yeah.
Once I was really a widow, I just was astounded
Yeah.
at what they tried to pull on me.
Did
and
you
what
ever,
they
as a widow,
did
tell
on
them
Prince.
you had a husband and wait till he comes in here just to get different treatment?
No, here's my line.
Yeah.
Here's my line.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. Here was my line. I would look at him and said, my husband is gone. God is my husband. Read your Bible. He is the husband of the widow. It says it in there.
Yeah.
And I said, you don't want to get my husband mad.
Yeah. And now we have a, we have a great one, right? So now women that are like trying to have a voice, and we see this a lot on YouTube, is they were calling them Karens, and it's like they never record what that woman was going to be before she started saying the things that she said, right? And it's so degrading because as women, we support that by calling each other Karens. And so are we just buying into this structure? Yes, right? Yeah, okay. Garden theology. Blame the woman and create power structure out of that other. Yes. Who wrote this? Matt. Anything you want to add? Anything you want to explain?
No, it's just that when you were talking about the fall, right, and out of that, the power structure is really, it's like you blame Eve.
Yeah.
It's the first thing out of
Right, you blame me.
Well, the woman, you made
Right,
her
we blame the lower power structure. We see this in, oh my gosh, in business, right? Who's the one that always gets off? The CEO, right?
Always a power.
It was somebody down, right? Somebody down the line further down that they're the ones that get fired.
Yep.
We saw this in banking crisis stuff, right? It's not the person at the top, right?
Right.
It's the other, them, down there. They're the problem. Enron, yeah. Bible written by men. That's actually true, yeah.
I take exception to that. I'm reading more and more about the fact that Mary was there when the
For
disciples
Luke.
wrote the
It was
books.
for Luke's,
Yeah,
or John's.
yeah.
I was trying to remember, we were talking about
Luke was part
this.
of it, and John was part of it, but, yeah,
Yeah.
John was supposedly.
How much
Yeah.
was Mary's source material?
Yeah.
I like this next one. Satan fits the criteria for power and control. He does the things of the power and control will. 100%. I love that somebody wrote that. I have to tell you, you did such a great sermon today. I really loved it. Not that I don't like all of everything, but I really love this one because the behind, and he says, get behind me, right? Get behind me. How often are we stepping out in front of God? And isn't a patriarch system stepping out in front of God, right? Isn't us that in any type of form that have agency stepping out in front of God, right? Christ was so good, and we talk about going to the tables and eating. Why? Because, and he says, we want to role model what he's doing, right? What Christ is doing. He's going to dinner with all these people, right? But how often are we instead in our agency and not stepping into having people in our congregation that don't fit within our Christian views, right?
And if you're behind,
Right.
look side to side, there's no power structure.
There's no power structure.
We're all
Right. Right.
followers.
We're all followers. Right. So, if we put Christ first, he's the head, right? Anyway, I like that. Children, comment. Children, we hand toddler girls a baby doll, plastic dishes, a broom, and dustpan. We hand boy toddlers trucks and guns.
Yeah.
Power is given even before the birth by how we talk regarding babies, girls, how they're in the womb, and we talk to them even when they're in the womb.
You have a daughter coming, you're gonna have to beat the boys off with a stick.
Yeah.
To the dad,
Yeah.
And I thought that was a part, you were talking about the industrial training.
Mm-hmm.
How much are we training our boys and our girls for the workplace by
Yeah.
giving girls dolls? So
Yeah.
your industrial training as a girl
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
maternity fraternity.
So some of the times what you've seen with new parents coming along is they're teaching them, like they're letting them choose. They give them both and let them choose what they like to. And then somehow we're going, look at them, they're trying to support LGBTQ stuff. And, and it's like, no, what we're doing is saying this is a child with his own mind and own specialties and own skill sets. And we want them to make choices in their life, what works for them.
And this was in the movie, the Barbie movie. Is
The Barbie
creator of
movie was a
Barbie
great one.
looked around and all there was for her daughter to play with
Yeah.
was babies.
Yeah,
And so she
Yeah.
innovatively made a doll for her daughter that
Yeah.
wasn't a baby, but was a sophisticated woman.
yeah, right.
Right.
A sophisticated woman
It
with a
was
briefcase
It
and,
was a total change of dynamic
Right.
for
Yeah.
what we give our daughters.
yeah, Gwen?
What, Katie, is teaching her boys to cook.
Uh-huh,
She has given them both play
Right.
cookware, etc. They each have baby dolls
yeah.
that they can learn to be daddies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And, we did that with our kids, which is why Katie knows how to use a screwdriver and a hammer and a saw.
mm-hmm.
And we did that with our boys. And when David was 7,
Mhm.
he cooked dinner for us without me even knowing he was doing it.
Yeah,
All of a sudden, he came outside, I was saying, Ken, we're gonna have to go in and fix dinner pretty soon.
yeah.
And David came outside and said, well, dinner's ready. And he had cooked spaghetti
Yeah,
for the
Yeah.
family.
yeah. I love when Patty and I first started dating. When we first started dating, she goes, well, who does the dishes and who does the yard work? And I said, we have an advantage over straight people. We just do what we like and we hire the rest out. That's our secret. We don't choose, we don't put an expectation or place on somebody. They just choose what they like to do. If they want to mow lawn, go mow lawn. Hell, I don't have mow lawn. So, yeah, that's exactly it, right? And I know some straight couples that work that way. They don't put expectations on each other. And one family I know, she does all the outside work. She loves doing the outside work, and he loves the housekeeping. So they actually does a switch role, yeah. So,
So I have a Jewish friend that I've had for 50 years. She had a foster sister, and she told me that her foster sister couldn't be counted as Jewish because her mother was not Jewish. Not because her father wasn't Jewish, but because her mother wasn't.
yeah,
And I don't know whether that was a World War II thing,
Yeah.
so that women in Europe were counted as Jewish if they had,
yeah, it goes back actually probably, I would say all the way back when you look at the time of Moses, women were in the house oftentimes and men were out, doing the slavery, building the bricks, building you had women out there too, but
I don't know
There
how
was-
far it goes back.
but you'll see that go back quite a way, that there's this historical stuff there, yeah. So hopefully we've given you more to think about and process, and where do we get these ideas from, and whether you choose to keep them or reject them, I don't know, up to you. But that's it for today. It's time.
Yay. Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you.
We'll be back next week? No, that's right. So we said we're doing this for 5 weeks, and the pause is next week, because we have to have the congregational meeting.
Oh,
So next Sunday, January 28th, congregational meeting. Following Sunday, I will be presenting on voice as vocare, which is calling, and then we'll do one more. Trish gets one. Trish is doing 1, 3, and 5, and I'm doing 2 and 4.
yeah. So I'll have
You'll
one more.
get me next, but
So,
it won't be next.
for those people at home, just remember next congregation, what is it called? We need
Annual meeting.
Annual meeting. So we need people here for the annual meeting next week, and we'll be skipping this.